Are you really that interested in architecture anymore? It's a sort of provocative title, Why Does Everyone Hate Modern Architecture? But there is a serious side to this, and actually, thanks to Elizabeth, used the word continuously, sort of collaborative. And as a practicing architect, I studied architecture with great enthusiasm and naivety. And we were prepared to, we were taught that we were going to change the world and do all sorts of exciting things. But no one really prepared us to go out into the world where we would be so ignored and professionally ignored and generally distrusted. And that distrust is, I think, profound. And as an architect, I think one has to give us, some air to that. Why does everybody distrust architects? I don't think they necessarily dislike architects. Architects have a reasonable press. I mean, we're not like bankers and lawyers and estate agents. I think personally, our profile is probably reasonable. And I think that profile is probably maintained by the fact that we have people like Frank Gehry and Norman Foster and Zaha Hadid who demonstrate that architecture is a sort of glamorous activity and they are doing amazing projects. But what I want to talk about is the fact that the lack of healthy dialogue, the low quality of dialogue about matters architectural and urban, I think has an effect on the quality of architectural production and the way our cities are being designed. The argument is polemicized. Architects are defensive and the public opinion and the expectations of the public are aggressive. And you can't really blame them in some ways. So as a practitioner, it's difficult for me to answer or really explain all of these things. But as a practitioner, I'm going to try and talk from, as it were, the subject out, as opposed to the way that we've heard today, this incredible explanations about how things could be and should be. I've got the button, haven't I? So do we all hate modern architecture? No, of course, a lot of you would say that's not fair. I love the Bilbao, Guggenheim, or whatever. Of course, there are wonderful singular buildings, and I would say that a number of architects are producing those buildings, whether they're concert halls or museums or those one-off buildings. I think they are incredibly good, and I think probably better than we've had for the last 20 or 30 years. But those buildings which are, which the light shines on, probably account for 0.0001% of, and not even that, of buildings that are being put up. So when I talk about architecture, forget for a minute the exceptions, because the exceptions are, we don't really have to worry about those extraordinary. The idea of collaboration, I think, is absolutely critical to the production of architecture. And that is what I'm lamenting, in a way. Why in one's normal professional process, why is dialogue so confrontational, and why are we in a sort of attritional process? We are, as architects, seeming always to be fighting developers, fighting planners, fighting the expectations of the public. And people forget that we also, in a way, are members of the public, and we have expectations as well. That atmosphere of attrition, I think, and this is, in a way, the theme I want to repeat, has a negative influence in the way that we collectively can perform, and on the quality of architecture and cities that we're getting. Because I would contest that if we really look around at what's going on, what's being built, most of us wouldn't necessarily be that happy. I will come back to this project, and I will use this as an example of collaboration. This was we won a competition to rebuild the ruin of the Neues Museum in Berlin, which we won this competition in 1997. The building had stood as a ruin for more than 50 years. It was, history had somehow left it behind. Most other monumental buildings in the center of Berlin had been rebuilt after the war. The Neues Museum, for various reasons, technical and cultural and political, had somehow been left behind. We proposed a way of rebuilding that was controversial. I didn't want to make a copy of what was there. I wanted to restore it and rebuild it from the ruin and give witness and evidence to what had happened to the building. That was an incredibly controversial decision or strategy, and it put me in dialogue, let's say, in a positive way, with the citizens of Berlin. Now, I see this as an incredible experience and a very positive experience. I want to explain that, and I want to use it as an explanation of collaborative effort. And when I say collaborative effort in architecture, I don't mean sort of the architect sits down with the local community and asks them what they want, because things don't necessarily happen like that. It's more, we did have fierce protests even. I mean, we had demonstrations against the project. We had all sorts of things. But the process, which itself took 11 years of non-stop work, meant that this dialogue, I think, was really critical to the quality of the work. So instead of being shy of, robust and healthy, mostly, dialogue and critique, I would argue that what I witnessed in this project and what I've witnessed generally on the project, because we're doing other buildings on the island, was not, as many of my German friends commiserated with me and said, you poor thing, you're having such a bad time, everyone's really going at you. And I said, well, we expect people, as architects, we want people to be interested in architecture. Well, they are, and we can't be, we can't choose which bits we want them to be interested in. So I will come back to this, and I want to use it as a positive example about how things can happen and how good they are when they happen and how important they are when they happen. But it also reminded me in a way that it doesn't happen very often. The great experience I had over this 11 years on this project, in a way, only made one's normal experience more frustrating, because while we were able to discuss ideas, we were able to articulate, we were forced to articulate, we were forced to think seriously, and we were forced to bring people with us. This was probably the most consensual, project that one could imagine. That consensuality, that dialogue that resolves towards sort of singularity, happens so often, so rarely in architecture. Of course, there are exceptions. One has a wonderful client sometimes, and especially if one's doing smaller projects, a house or something like that, then it's much easier. Now, as an architect, one can't get images like this out of one's mind. This is a fresco in Siena, 14th century fresco by Lorenzetti. It's a series of frescoes. Siena at this time was one of the great and powerful merchant cities. What I like about this image is that it seems to show architecture in a very natural relationship to the individual. It's offering protection. It offers a place of public collection. There's a sort of an idea of the collective. Those of you that know Siena know that it's sort of built on a hill. You can even feel the hill in here. You can sort of sense that architecture is a sort of mediation between the individual human and the bigger world, and nature. Architecture here, I mean, it is a contrived architecture. It's not, it's not sort of mud huts. It's obviously a designed and elegant architecture, and we know from Siena it was. And yet, there is a sort of harmonic quality about, the position of the individual, the place of architecture as special and normal. There's a certain balance and normality. And that sort of haunts one as what architecture should be. It's a bit cheap, I suppose, to then show what architecture tends to be. And in a way, what's happened. This is Miami, downtown. It could be anywhere. Is this architecture? Is it development? This is done in our name. We apparently want this. This is what the market tells us to do. I'm an architect. I don't know why it happens. I wouldn't even know. I mean, if someone asked me to design a building, I'd probably say yes, of course, because one has an office to run and a business to. But I would also be interested in maybe the challenge. But what can you do as an architect if someone says, well, have a go at one of these towers? This, by the way, is a tower by I.M. and actually it's a rather nice one. I think it's sort of nicely, it's probably the best. It's got nice curves and it's lit up nice at night. But is that what, that's like a bedside lamp or designing a, so architecture now is sort of giving shape and decoration to something that we don't believe in. But now, instead of, architecture as being something that we're in and we're around and somehow seems part of us, it seems to be something that's happening to us. When did that happen? And I think that contributes to our sort of impotence in our ability to discuss architecture. Now, when I was trying to put this together, in my study, I was thinking, well, maybe this is not true. Maybe modern architecture is not so bad, and maybe I'm exaggerating. So I went out with my iPhone to find the closest piece of modern architecture I could to my house. This was 50 meters away. Now, no wonder you hate us. I mean, this is appalling. But how does this happen? I mean, is this a bad architect on a bad day, a good architect on a bad? I'm pretty sure it's not a good architect on a bad day. Is it a reasonable architect on a bad day? Is it the architect? And this is what I'm talking about. Our cities, and here we have actually, just to mock us in the background, there's a wonderful church by John Soane. We are making this, and who is making it? Because, and why does it happen? And again, as an architect, I don't quite know. I know the ingredients that go into this. I know that there is a certain laziness in there, but I suspect, and again, this is a building probably of the 1970s. This contains, the DNA of all bad modern architecture. A sort of cynical client that wants to get as many bedrooms onto the site as possible. A construction industry which wants to panelize buildings and make the assembly as quick as possible. So buildings, instead of being built as if they were to last forever, they're dominated by the concern of building them as quick as possible. The classic concept of architecture as being about permanence is being translated into the idea of quick building, which everything else in our world is also accepting. How did we get there? Well, it all started so well. This is Corb, the Villa Savoye at Poissy, 1928. You can really come along with this poem, this dream of, after sort of the claustrophobia of the 19th century, the battle of styles, and architecture becomes bright, modern, free, all the things that we expected. Mies van der Rohe, 1929. I mean, who can really not like this? It's wonderful. All of a sudden it's modern, And if you think about Victorian architecture compared to this, this was exciting. But this is 80 years ago. Now here comes trouble. Le Corbusier, the author of the first wonderful building, here architects are now not only telling us what architecture might look like, how the cities might look. And of course, after the war, we had a lot of rebuilding. And by the 60s, that's where this dream has come. And at this point, Norman Mailer said, in 30 years, an aesthetic movement that was full of possibility has now become full of, non-possibility. So modern movement dies in the 1980s. This is Philip Johnson. Notice the glasses exactly like Le Corbusier's. Philip Johnson saying, I've got the answer. Philip Johnson, the one actually that put the first exhibition about the international style on at Museum Modern Art in the 1930s, nearly the inventor of modern architecture, here with his famous AT&T building, which says all you have to do is to take buildings and put classical motifs on them and everything will be saved. Of course, it was another American that really showed a better solution, or at least showed another idea, which was architecture as a sort of spectacle and as, in a way, the sort of our new cathedrals. But in the meantime, what's happened to the typical architecture of our cities? I'm going to come back to the ruin. What was the other thing that I really learnt on the Noise Museum project was that we don't build very well anymore. And in that process, we've seemed to have lost the physical quality of architecture. And what's extraordinary about a ruin, and again, this is Rievaulx Abbey, a wonderful photograph by Roger Fenton in the 19th century. Architecture here has become very comfortable with nature, and the ruins have a great physicality. This is John Soane even showing his own building, the Bank of England, as a ruin, imagining that it will become even more beautiful as a ruin, suggesting that this sort of, permanence is something wonderful about it. Back to Berlin, what do we do with this? We restore it. We take the idea of the Greek vase instead of completing, instead of filling in the gaps. Of course, the idea is to give back the form and give back sense to the project. That's what we did. The sequence of processes that we did throughout the building, which wasn't to impose a sort of picture about what it should look like, but actually work from what it should feel like and what it should end up like. So you see that the final conclusion to rooms and spaces and new pieces is a sort of collage of what was there and what we put back. We are building on history and we're not erasing it. Enormous protests, a flyer saying, do you really want the horrible Chipperfield version, or shouldn't we have it back like it should have, like it was once? Why couldn't I build it back the staircase? Enormous collaboration. This looks like it's a press conference. It's not. It's just all our meetings. Every decision had to be confirmed and gone through incredible process. This is the original stair. That's the bomb. That's our speculation of how it should be, and that's how it became. The dialogue, which we were forced to deal with, I think helped the project. This is when we did the soft opening. 10,000 people queuing up to come in to see it, queuing for 6 hours in the rain. And all of a sudden, and I think as a reward for this dialogue and this process, and it's a very inclusive process, not only the professional team, but also the general public, it sort of protected the project. And the project now has become, I think, pretty accepted. And these are the last images showing